disputed are on the back, okay?
Okay.
Alright. You're free to go. Yep. Okay, any questions?
No, I'm just trying to figure out how do I display that thing on that back of there.
Do you have tools?
Beg your pardon?
Do you have tools, like a drill?
Yeah.
You just need to look, you mount it right here. Am I allowed to drill into it? Yeah. Right, because of your social situation, but just get on, okay?
Yep. Thank you.
So you have to be all BC in like 9 days or something?
They think I live in BC. And I don't know how to prove them otherwise that I don't live in BC. So all they can give me right at the moment is proper display of license plate.
Oh, okay.
Huh?
Is it okay? I'm wearing my nice PJs I got for Christmas.
You're what?
I'm wearing my PJs I got for Christmas. I'm like, they're like they're my new winter PJs. They're like my other ones that I used to wear all the time. Like, I still wear the other ones, but they're getting kind of old. That's the problem.
I honestly have to get a lawyer. I've been pulled over 24 fucking times in a fucking year.
That's ridiculous.
Got mail. Grab my license plate. That's my license, bro. "24 fucking times."
Yeah, I think that's really ridiculous. It's like almost like half the
That's twice a month.